Now there is one extra column which is added here called the D type. Now the D type tells you what class it is. Now this is actually recording the class name. Now this is a vehicle. The first record that we saved was vehicle. Let me see this. It is a direct implementation of, it's a direct instance of the base class vehicle. It has just the vehicle ID and the vehicle name. So that is what's happening here. It just has saved the vehicle ID and the vehicle name. It does not save these values, and it calls this D type as the vehicle. It cannot have these values as well because these properties are for the child classes. The base class does not have these two properties, so it will not get saved. Now the two-wheeler has a steering handle, and it also, since it's extending the vehicle, it also has the vehicle ID and the vehicle name of the parent plus the steering handle. So what Hibernate has done is it filled the vehicle ID, vehicle name, and the steering handle. It does not have a steering wheel because that's another child, so it just saves these three values, and then of course the D type is the name of the class, which is a two-wheeler. Same way, a four-wheeler has a steering wheel, and of course it inherits the vehicle ID and the vehicle name because it's actually extending the vehicle. So obviously it has the vehicle ID, vehicle name, and of course the steering wheel, and it's been marked as a four-wheeler. Now this is the default way in which Hibernate maps inheritance. If you do not give any inheritance mapping information, this is the default that Hibernate carries out. Now this D type is called as a discriminator. Now in order to make queries easier, and in order to identify what type of object you're saving, what type of object individual records are, you have a separate column which tells you what class it is. Say for example, I could have a two-wheeler with null value in the steering handle. So what would happen is this would have, say I've eventualized the bike here, right? Now for this bike, say I do not set the steering handle property. Now it would just have the ID and the name. Now this would be blank, then it would just have the ID and the name. Now how can you distinguish this one car from two bike? How would you know that this is a vehicle and this is a two-wheeler? Because all the records here have these columns. So the way to discriminate between these two records, having been implementations of two different objects, is by using this discriminator type. Now this D type column tells you what class this is. So this is a vehicle class, this is a two-wheeler class, and this is a four-wheeler class. So this is the default way in which Hibernate implements inheritance. So this is of course configurable. You can have multiple strategies to implement, and the way to configure the strategies is by going to this parent class, which is the base class, and having an annotation here called @inheritance. So this is not mandatory. We can import this. So this is not mandatory, as we've seen. If we have not given any inheritance, it goes for the single table strategy. So we can of course configure this as well. Let me start with the single table strategy for now, and we'll implement the other strategies later on. So in order to say that the strategy is a single table strategy, so what I do is I fill this property strategy equals, and now as with all the other types, we have an enumeration which provides the value. So I use the enumeration inheritance type dot. Now here we have all the strategies that we have here. We have a join, single table, and table per class. Now we're going to go with single table because this is the default. By selecting this, I'm not going to change anything. It's still going to have the same strategy as the default, but let's do this and we'll change this later. Select single table. Now it's also imported the inheritance and the inheritance type for me. Now there is this other option that I can do here. I told you about the discriminator value here. You see this dtype, which has the name of the class, and it helps us to track what object it is, whether it's an object of the base vehicle class or the two-wheeler or the four-wheeler. Now I can of course configure how this this discriminator is being generated. Like I can configure the column name, and I can configure the values that are being generated for that. By default it's the class name, but say I want to make this something different, then I can do that. The way I do it is by adding this annotation called at discriminator column. Okay, now this discriminator column is again an annotation that I need to import from javax.persistence. Now this discriminator column has a few properties which are configurable. First one is the name, and this is the name of the column itself. So I will call this as the vehicle type, and the name of the column will be vehicle type. And then there is one more option that I can use, which is the discriminator type. This tells Hibernate what is the data type of the value here. I will leave this as discriminator type dot string, but here are a couple of other ways we can use a discriminator. I can have an integer value instead, or I can have a character value instead, so it'll just be one character. I can choose string. String is of course the default. We saw the class name was added as the discriminator, and that was a string. So I can choose integer or character also if required. I will choose string for now. Okay, and now this is my discriminator configuration. Now if I run this, what will happen is the column name, instead of this d type, it will be vehicle underscore type, which is a good thing because we have vehicle information here. So that you can specify a proper name for the discriminator column. Now there is another thing you can do here. Say this is a class name which gets populated. Now depending on the class name, this value will get populated. Let's say I want to change that. So in that case, what I can do is I can go to the child class. So here, this is what is the this is a two-wheeler class, and this is the four-wheeler class, right? So here I want to have a different discriminator value for the two-wheeler class. So let's say I want to have a discriminator value. Let me type this discriminator value. So this is the annotation that helps us to configure the value that you want to set, and I can set a particular value here. Let me call this as bike. So what's going to happen is, instead of mentioning the class name as a discriminator for this entity, it would by default it would have two-wheeler as a discriminator. Instead of that, it has the bike as a discriminator. So that value, the column here that I've defined, the vehicle type, is going to have the value of bike for all objects of the two-wheeler class that has been persisted. Now, the same way, I can have a discriminator type. Let me have a discriminator value, sorry, as car here. So all objects of the four-wheeler class that are persisted will have the discriminator column value as car. So let's run this one more time. Okay, now here itself you can see the values of bike and car are inserted, and then you can see the discriminator column is vehicle type. So let's verify that once more by querying the database. So here you go, the discriminator column, which was earlier D type, has now been changed to vehicle type, and you have the vehicle, bike, and car as the discriminator. So these two are configurations which we have done in the corresponding entity class. Of course, we can do the configuration in the base class as well, and then you can change this from vehicle to anything else you want. So this is the single table strategy. So we have seen one of the strategies that we can use for inheritance. Everything is going to get dumped into a single table. This is fine for simple, simple inheritance. But let's say you anticipate a lot of querying among different types of vehicles. This might lead to a very complicated query because everything has to be referred to in a single table. So we will look at another strategy where we can split this up into multiple tables in the next tutorial.